Hi, this is Bill Varney from FishTheSurf.com. Today we're going to talk about artificial lures in the surf. We're going to talk about three of my favorite lures to use in the wintertime. Number one would be grubs and the various types of grubs and how to rig those. Number two would be a bait like the Berkeley Gulp bait, how to rig those and how to hook those baits and how to fish them correctly in the surf. And then the third would be the newest bait that's out, the Gamakatsu DuraScent Baits, how to hook those baits, rig those baits, and how to use all three of them in the surf. Now let's just take a minute now to look at the different lures, the grubs, the DuraScent baits, the Gulp baits, and how to rig those for the surf. When fishing with grubs and Gulp baits, and of course the Gamakatsu DuraScent products, really the best setup in the ocean and in surf fishing would be the Carolina rig. You can go into more detail in my video about the Carolina rig, but just a simple overview is it's made up of a sliding egg sinker, a bead, swivel, 6-pound fluorocarbon leader material, and a very sharp hook on the end. Couple things just to remember right off the bat is the bigger the surf, the heavier the current, the heavier your sinker is going to be. So you might normally start out with a 1/2 ounce or a 3/4 ounce and go all the way up to an ounce if needed, if it's really windy or there's a strong current. And then vice versa, if you had a very calm day, you might go all the way down to an 1/8 of an ounce sinker and use that on a very calm day. And then in combination with that, the length of your leader is very important. So the bigger the surf, the shorter your leader. So if I was to go down to the beach and it's windy and whitecapping, or the waves are about chest high, I'd probably use about this long, about a 1-foot leader. And then the smaller the surf, the calmer it is, the longer your leader is going to be. And then if I was to be down there on a very calm day, about 36-inch leader. Normally I'd start with about an 18 to 22-inch leader. And then, as I said, if the surf was big, I'd go to a very short, probably 10, 12-inch leader there. The reason for that, all surf fish feed on the bottom. So you want to make sure that your bait is on the bottom. If your leader is too long and there's too much of a surge in the water, your bait will be way up here above the bottom and all the fish will be going underneath it. So once again, that's the setup we use. The Carolina rig, very, very simple to use. And then what exactly do we use on the Carolina rig? Well, with artificial baits like grubs and so forth, we have lots of different choices. One choice might be these big hammer 2-inch or 1.5 and 2-inch grubs. There's a variety of different colors and shapes of these. The most common would be one with a paddle tail that looks a lot like this one, looks exactly like this one. And some of the things to remember about using these grubs is that early in the morning and in the evening, late afternoon, when the light is low, you always want to concentrate on using a motor oil grub. You want to use something that's a derivation of motor oil. So you would have like motor oil in red, motor oil in gold, motor oil in silver, Christmas, which is a bunch of different colors of flakes inside the motor oil. Those work really well in low light situations. In high light situations, like the middle of the day, what seems to work best is by using a grub that's something like this, like a clear with red flake. This seems to work really well in the middle of the day because it casts a greater shadow than a dark color would be. Whereas a dark color and early in the morning, in the evening, and certainly at night will cast a much darker shadow, which is what will attract the fish. So those are big hammer grubs. Those are 1.5 to 2-inch grubs. Once again, they have a swim tail on the back of them, and that's one example of something they can use artificially in the surf, especially in the wintertime. Another example of what you might use in the surf is the DuraScent baits from Gamakatsu. This one, of course, is a green, motor oil green with a gold flake. This is a red, a brick-colored red. The reason that these are effective, and the reason that we're going to talk about Gulp and it's effective also, is that all of these artificial worms were fashioned after natural baits, after lugworms and bloodworms that look very much color-wise and shape-wise the same as these. So these are the Gamakatsu DuraScent baits. Another great bait to use in the surf, and has been around for a while now, is the Gulp bait. And of course, the Gulp bait, this is the 2-inch camo sandworm. It also has a little kind of gold flake in there. It's in its own sauce here, so it's got a flavor to it. It's nice and soft. Here is an example of one, once again, looking a lot like a lugworm or a bloodworm in that it's olive green on one side and kind of a brick red color on the other side. So that is also a very good bait to use in the surf. The one thing to remember about these Gulp baits, because they come in a juice and they have a Ziploc bag, is that whatever you do, be sure once you open them to put them in a second Ziploc bag, because they will inevitably leak and you don't want them leaking into your car. So be sure once you open them, put them in that second or maybe even a third Ziploc bag to make sure that they don't leak. Another couple baits to look at that are kind of derivations of that would be, this is the slider grub. This comes from Charlie Brewer's company in Tennessee, and these were originally crappie grubs. Here's a look at the package of them. These were originally crappie sliders. We came across these probably 15 years ago and started using them in the surf for perch, and found out that this little paddle tail that it has on the end, so instead of having a tail like this, it's got a little paddle tail. That tail goes back and forth and thumps a bit, and these slider grubs seem to work very, very well also in the surf. And then another addition to that is this new bait from Honey Badger, which is very, very similar. It has a paddle tail. It's got a little stinger on the end of the paddle tail. It is a little bit longer. We're looking at about 2.5 to 3 inch grub here. And this also works very well in the surf. And if you notice with all of these, with the exception of the black one, they're all a motor oil color and a motor oil derivative. This one has a little red flake in it. There's silver flake, gold flake, other choices like that. So these also work very, very well in the surf. The best way to fish these is to cast them out in a fan motion, which means that you're going to be casting to 10 o'clock, you're going to be casting to 12 o'clock, you're going to be casting to 2 o'clock, and then slowly retrieving them along the bottom. And when you get a bite, you want to just reel down and lift your rod up. There's no reason to swing your rod. Just reel down, lift your rod up. 8 out of 10 times you'll get the fish. If you don't, just drop your rig back down, right down to the bottom, and slowly begin to pull your grub or your other bait along the bottom, and 8 out of 10 times you'll get a bite from a fish who will rebite on it. So those are basically the different baits that we're looking at in the surf. And the next question is, well, how do we go about and actually hook those baits? What's the most effective way to hook them? Well, first of all, when I'm fishing in the surf and I'm using a Carolina rig, I'm always going to be using some type of bead. Like in this case, I've got a red bead on here, and that's used to act as a cushion between the swivel and the sinker, so that sand doesn't get pounded into the sinker and it binds on your line. So the thing to remember about that is in the summertime, we always fish a clear bead, because Corbina have very good eyesight, and if it's an orange or red or a different color bead, they'll most likely not get anywhere near your bait. But in the wintertime, when we're fishing perch and spotfin and yellowfin croaker, not quite as smart of a fish, so we'll use bright colors for that bead as a cushion. Sometimes we'll use red, orange, green, any other bright color will attract those perch, those big perch, right to your lure. So those are the things that you want to use in the wintertime. In the summer, once again, you're always going to stick with clear. In addition to the beads that you would use as a cushion between the sinker and the swivel, there are other beads that can be used which are much smaller, 2mm beads versus the 6mm beads. These, of course, are the 6mm beads. But we can also use on our leader beads as an attractant also to go above these baits. Here's an example of 3 beads, an orange and 2 red beads, that are on the leader itself and end up right on top of the hook. Some of my favorite colors to use for these attractive beads for perch and spotfin and yellowfin croaker are orange, red, and of course the chartreuse green. All 3 of these work great as leader beads on your leader in the surf. So in order for us to hook these baits, they all hook basically the same, and I'm going to give you an example of each one. So here we have the Gulp bait, and this is of course the top. This would be like the head, let's say, flat area. This would be the tail. And all we do is we take a number 4 hook, once again the Gamakatsu or the Owner Mosquito light hook, very sharp, very thin wire. We enter it right in the middle. We push it down, we push the worm up, we poke the hook out through the side, and the next thing that we want to do is we want to get it as straight as we possibly can on the hook. The reason that we want our baits in the surf as straight as we can on the hook is that if we don't, if the bait, like for example when we get a bite sometimes, is pulled down and is somewhat shaped like that, what will happen is that bait will spin as it's returning to shore. What we want is a bait to look much more natural. When worms or sand crabs come out of the sand, they actually go back and forth as they come along the bottom as they make their way to or away from shore. And that's what we want our bait to look like. So this is the Gulp bait, very, very simple for you to hook. And then when you're done with that bait, very easy for you to put it right back in the package and get it rehydrated. Another bait that we love to use in the surf and the way that we hook them are these grubs. Of course, this is the curly tail grub. And we take it the same way where we have the flat end, which is the top would be its head. Of course, this is the tail. We're going to go down right through the very middle of it. We're going to punch our hook out through the side. Straighten it on the hook. We want it to be as flat as it possibly can be on the hook. That way it's not going to spin at all as it's making its way back to shore. With these baits, you want to check them every, 3 to 5 casts, I'd say. And certainly each time after getting a bite, make sure that your pants are not pulled down. That's what we call that. Make sure that your grub or your bait is not pulled down because, of course, it'll spin in a circle. Just go back and straighten it out every few casts. Just make sure it's perfectly flat, just like that, on the hook. So that is the grub. And then another grub that we love to use, of course, is the paddle tail grub. And we hook that exactly the same way, where we have the tail, the head. We go through the head, all the way down through the head. We pop the hook out through the side. And then once again, we flatten it out as flat as possible on the hook. So it gives the most natural presentation possible. The Gamakatsu bait works exactly the same, except for one addition we make to the Gamakatsu, and we certainly make this addition to all the other baits too, is by taking one of the Gamakatsu salmon eggs, these orange or red salmon eggs, and we punch the hook all the way through them. We push them up our hook. We actually pull them up onto our line, and we put that right above the eye of the hook, right where the knot is. And that helps us to attract more fish because that looks very, very similar to the eggs of a sand crab squirting out. And whether we've got a grub or an artificial bait below that or a sand crab, they all work very, very well. And sometimes, like in this case, I'll use the leader beads in addition to that orange egg to really attract the fish. And this really seems to work all year long. And I've seen also quite a few corbina caught in this setup with a sand crab on the bottom. So when we're not using a sand crab, we'll use, for example, the Gamakatsu sandworm. Once again, olive color. It's got the gold or the silver flecks inside of it that make it look very realistic and shiny. What we're going to do is we're going to take the top head of it here. Of course, this bottom part is the tail. And we're going to go right in through the middle of that. We're going to push it up our hook and punch it out the side. And then as soon as we've done that, we're going to, of course, straighten it out as straight as possible on our hook. And that's what we're looking for. When retrieving that along the bottom, it has a much more natural look to it as it goes, rather than spinning through the water. And then the last bait that I wanted to show you and how to hook it are these brand new baits out by Honey Badger. These, once again, these use many of the same olive colors, burnt orange, brown, reds, things like that. This grub is a little bit longer. This is about a 2-inch grub. Made by Honey Badger. It's got a little paddle tail and it's got a little stinger on the end of it. So we're going to hook this a little bit differently. We're going to take this and we're going to turn it on its side. We're going to take the hook and we're going to go right down through the head here. We're going to pop the hook out through the side. We're going to straighten it out as much as we possibly can on our hook. We want it to be as flat as possible. And in this case, we want the tail exposed like this, the hook coming out opposite of the stinger here. So as that's pulled across the bottom, it looks very, very realistic. In the last couple of months, we've seen quite a few corbina caught on these grubs. Very unusual for a grub to catch corbina. It's not that they don't, but there's so many more perch caught on them. But lately, there's been a lot on this Honey Badger bait. Just an excellent bait for the surf. So we've got the Honey Badger. We've got the slider crappie grub with a paddle tail, very similar tail. We've got the Gamakatsu DuraScent bait. We've got the big hammer with a curly tail on it. And then of course we've got the Gulp bait, all of which work very, very well in the surf. Now, one thing I like to do to enhance my baits is add a little scent to them. Even though many of them come with scent, have scent in them, I will also add a little bit of scent to them, probably every 3 to 5 casts. When I reel in, I'll dip this in my bag of scent and then cast it out. One of my favorite things to use, I know you're going to laugh, it seems so odd, is Taco Bell hot sauce. Taco Bell, Del Taco, Panda Express, doesn't matter if it's mild or hot or Del Scorcho, they all seem to work. And the reason that they work is that when you buy hot sauces in the store, they have 2 things in them, oil and vinegar. Now, oil is really important with the use of grubs. For example, when you look at these grubs in the package, the reason they don't all stick together is because there's a couple drops of olive oil in there. And by having a little bit of olive oil, it sticks to the product and keeps them from sticking to one another. That's what the oil does in the hot sauce. It hangs on to the product. And then the hot sauce also has vinegar. So when the fish bites down on your grub or your Gulp bait, it has the texture that it likes to bite into, and then it's also got flavor to it. So what I do is I take a couple packets of hot sauce, I squeeze them into one of these snack size zip top bags, and then every 3rd or 5th cast I dip my bait in there and I cast out, and they seem to work very, very well. Particularly works well in the winter when there's not a lot of other food available, and when those fish who are moving very slowly because their metabolism slowed down takes a bite of your bait, they not only have that natural feel to its softness, but they also have some flavor to it. So try that out. Works really, really well in the surf. Thank you for taking a few minutes to learn all about the different artificial baits to be used in the surf. To learn more about lightline surf fishing, check out fishthesurf.com. To see all the different equipment that I use on the beach, rods, reels, terminal tackle, every day, check out surffishtackle.com. Thank you so much for watching.